I woke before the sun that morning, long before any reasonable man my age should be stumbling around in the dark. There was no alarm set. My body simply rose from the mattress the way an old tree creaks in the winter wind, slow, involuntary, but certain. Something in me felt unsettled, like a quiet tremor beneath the earth. I didn't know why, not yet. The house was cold. It always is when you live alone, but that morning the air felt sharper, as if it carried news it wasn't ready to speak out loud. I brewed coffee, though half the time I forget to drink it. I stood by the kitchen window, watching dawn smear a faint ribbon of light across the sky. For a moment, everything felt suspended, caught between yesterday and something that hadn't yet begun. Then my phone rang. I nearly dropped the mug. It was early, too early for a social call, too early for anyone to want to ask an old man like me for anything. I glanced at the screen. It wasn't my son. It wasn't even a number I recognized at first glance. But underneath the digits, I saw a small contact card. Linda, Megan's mother. My heart pushed against my ribs. I answered with more breath than voice. "Hello?" Her voice was rushed, excited, like someone half running and half crying. My knees softened. For a moment, I pressed my hand to the counter because the world had tilted too quickly. My first grandchild, my son's first child. My wife would have cried hearing news like this. She always wanted to see the next generation, to hold the future in her hands. Life robbed her of that. And now, life was offering me a chance to witness it for her. "I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for the coat hanging on the chair. "Oh, well, Daniel didn't answer his phone," she continued breathlessly. "We're heading to St. Mary's. Just thought you should know." "You did right," I told her. "Thank you for calling." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long second, heart pounding like an old engine desperate to keep running. I felt something swell inside me, hope, pride, disbelief, all of it tangled together. My son might not have called me himself, but maybe he was too overwhelmed. Maybe he couldn't think straight. Birth does that to a man. I remembered trembling so violently when my wife's water broke that the nurse took my pulse before hers. I grabbed my keys, jacket, wallet, then paused. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from Daniel. Finally, I thought. He must want me there after all. I opened the message, expecting something hurried or hopeful. What I read instead hollowed me out like a struck bell. "Don't come to the hospital." Just that. Just 4 words. No explanation. No punctuation. Not even a dad. As if I were some intruder, a stranger trying to wedge myself into a moment not meant for me. My grip tightened around the phone until my hand shook. A part of me waited for a follow-up message, something softer, something that made sense. Instead, 3 dots appeared, vanished, reappeared, then disappeared again. He was typing, then deleting, then choosing silence over clarity. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the words he'd sent. It would have been easier if he'd yelled, if he'd cursed, if he'd told me I'd failed him somehow. But this cold dismissal stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. I sat down slowly, lowering myself into the nearest chair like my bones had aged 10 years in one heartbeat. I read the text again. "Don't come to the hospital." I whispered it aloud, just to hear how it sounded. Cruel, detached. I sat down slowly, lowering myself into the nearest chair like my bones had aged 10 years in one heartbeat. I read the text again. "Don't come to the hospital." I whispered it aloud just to hear how it sounded. Cruel, detached, final. As if my presence would ruin something sacred. My first instinct was anger, hot, immediate, the instinctive rage of a father who'd spent years trying to reconnect with a son who kept building higher walls. But beneath that was something more painful. Shame, embarrassment, a withering doubt that maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't deserve to be there. My son and I have walked on cracked ground for years, careful with each other but never close enough to forget where the breaks were. After my wife died, grief sucked me into myself like a collapsing star. I didn't see how much Daniel needed me back then. By the time I tried to reach him, he'd already built a life with someone who didn't know me, didn't know the man I used to be. And maybe she believed the version of me he allowed her to see. Still, to be told not to come, not even for the birth of his child? I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. My breath felt too thin. Old memories flickered behind my eyelids. Daniel as a boy, clinging to my shoulders, asking me questions about everything, trusting me with anything. The last time he looked at me that way was, what, 40 years ago? I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the phone, feeling the vibration that never came. Outside, the sun finally crested above the rooftops, painting the kitchen in a pale, soft glow. It should have been a hopeful morning. Instead, it felt like I'd been shut out of the most important moment of my son's life. Maybe I deserved it. Maybe I didn't. But I knew one thing. Showing up after receiving that text would only make things worse. I wouldn't put Megan under more stress. I wouldn't push myself into a room where I wasn't wanted. So I hung my coat back on the chair. I sat in the quiet house, listening to a refrigerator hum and the faint ticking of the wall clock, the world moving without me. Hours stretched ahead like a lonely road. I imagined Daniel pacing in the waiting room, Megan gripping his hand, Linda fussing in the corner. A family forming itself around a new life. A family I was forbidden from joining. I poured the coffee I'd forgotten into the sink. My hands felt cold, my chest even colder. I wasn't supposed to go, I finally murmured to the empty kitchen. But even as the words left my mouth, something deeper, a tug, a whisper, told me that fate had its own plans for me. Plans Daniel didn't see coming. Plans I couldn't predict. Something was brewing, just out of sight, and it was already on its way. I didn't move from the kitchen table for a long while after reading that message. It's a strange thing how 4 words can paralyze a man more effectively than any physical blow. There are bruises that form on the skin, and then there are bruises that bloom somewhere deeper where no one can see them except the man carrying them. That morning, the bruise spread quietly inside me. Eventually, I stood up, because sitting still only made the silence louder. I wandered through my own house like a visitor, not touching much, just drifting. My wife's old quilt hung over the back of the couch, faded from years of sun. Her picture stood on the mantel beside a dusty vase she always meant to replace. Sometimes I talk to her when the house gets too quiet. That morning, I didn't. The words would have cracked in my throat. I tried to make the day move, but time refused to obey me. I found myself standing in the doorway of Daniel's old room. The door creaked as it opened, protesting. Sometimes I talk to her when the house gets too quiet. That morning, I didn't. The words would have cracked in my throat. I tried to make the day move, but time refused to obey me. I found myself standing in the doorway of Daniel's old room. The door creaked as it opened, protesting just like everything else in this house tends to do. I rarely go inside, not because it hurts, but because it reminds me of a story with too many missing chapters. The posters he taped on the walls as a teenager were still there, curled, peeling, faded. A few comics stacked in the corner. A wooden baseball bat I bought him for his 10th birthday leaned against the closet door. He used that bat for months, swinging at invisible fastballs in the backyard until his palms blistered. I remembered sitting in a folding chair, watching him swing over and over, offering pointers he ignored. Not because he thought he knew better. He was just a boy, trying to impress his father. And I, stupidly, didn't always see that. Sometimes I was too tired from work, too distracted, too wrapped up in providing instead of being present. My wife, God bless her, was better at those small, essential things. It's funny, though, when you look back, the things you think are small end up being the very foundation of everything that comes after. I picked up his old baseball bat and brushed my thumb over the scuffed wood. "You won your first game with this," I murmured, "and you looked right at me when you crossed home plate." I set it back carefully. The room sighed as if relieved to be left in peace again. Walking down the hallway, I found myself thinking about the fractures between us. Not sudden, not dramatic, just hairline cracks growing deeper each year. After my wife died, I didn't know how to grieve and father at the same time. I chose the wrong one. Or rather, I chose nothing, sinking into work, into silence, into the false comfort of routine. When Daniel needed a father, I was a ghost in my own home. He forgave me on the surface, he said the right words, but resentment doesn't vanish just because you apologize. Sometimes resentment becomes a language spoken in small gestures, sidelong glances, subtle exclusions. Sometimes it becomes a text message telling your father not to come to the hospital. The ring of the doorbell jolted me back to the present. It was Mrs. Callahan, my neighbor of nearly 20 years. She's the kind of woman who knows when something is wrong before you even exhale. A retired teacher with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of when a person's heart is lying to their face. "You're up early," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. She wore her usual floral cardigan and a concerned stare. "You look pale. Did something happen?" I tried to wave it off. "Nothing important." She narrowed her eyes. "Important things are the ones old men try to hide." I sighed. Daniel texted, told me not to come to the hospital. Her hand flew to her chest. "But the baby's coming today. Why on earth?" I shrugged. It was easier than trying to explain the stitched-together grief that formed the fabric of our relationship. He must not want the stress, or maybe he just doesn't want me. "That's nonsense," she snapped. "You're his father." I chuckled dryly. "Some days, I'm not so sure." She rested her hand on my arm. "Go." "He's scared, that's all. First-time fathers don't think straight. You'll regret staying home. I promise you that." I looked away. "I don't want to make things worse, not for Megan." "Well," she said, folding her arms, "your wife would have gone." "He's scared, that's all. First-time fathers don't think straight. You'll regret staying home. I promise you that." I looked away. "I don't want to make things worse, not for Megan." "Well," she said, folding her arms, "your wife would have gone." That landed harder than she knew. My wife wasn't afraid of anything. Not confrontation, not emotion, not the messy in-between places where families either fall apart or stitch themselves back together. But I was never as brave as she was. "I think I'll wait for news," I told her softly. "If Daniel needs me, he'll call." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but call me if you need anything, even if it's just company." After she left, the house felt even quieter than before, as if her footsteps had stirred something only to let it settle again. I sat on the couch and stared at my phone for a long while, willing it to ring. It didn't. I tried reading a book, but the words blurred. I tried watching TV, but the noise grated on me. Eventually, I just walked circles around the living room, the way a man paces outside a door he's too afraid to knock on. Hours passed. The light in the house shifted, tracing the slow arc of a day that felt like it didn't want to move forward. My mind replayed Daniel's text until the words wore grooves in me. Maybe I should have gone anyway. Maybe I should have at least waited in the lobby. Maybe... Around noon, I finally sat down, exhausted from doing nothing. That's when it hit me. A memory, a moment buried deep beneath years of distance. Daniel, 12 years old, telling me he didn't need me at his baseball games anymore. He'd said it casually, angrily, just a boy testing independence, but he still looked for me in the stands every single time. Even when he said he didn't want me there, a part of him still needed to know I was. And here I was, repeating the same mistake, believing his words instead of understanding his fear. I leaned back, rubbing my face with trembling hands. God help me. I hope he doesn't regret pushing me away today. Outside, the sky was clearing after a short drizzle. The world washed clean and strangely bright. If only relationships were washed clean so easily. But they aren't. They take years, decades sometimes, to rebuild. And sometimes a single moment, a single text, knocks the whole structure down again. I didn't know it yet, but that text, that small, cold dismissal, was only the surface of something deeper, something more tangled, something that would soon drag all of us into truths we'd been afraid to face. And fate, strange, stubborn fate, was already moving pieces behind our backs, setting up the moment that would pull me from my lonely kitchen and straight into the heart of a story I never expected to be part of. But for now, all I could do was wait. And waiting, when you're a father who fears he's been replaced, is its own kind of agony. The hours that followed stretched out like old taffy, slow, sticky, impossible to escape. Every corner of the house seemed determined to remind me how small my world had become without family in it. I wandered from room to room with no real destination in mind, as if movement itself could distract me from the gnawing ache in my chest. I ended up back in the kitchen, standing over the sink, watching a single droplet of water cling to the faucet's lip. It trembled there, stubborn and unfallen, until gravity finally convinced it to let go and disappear. I don't know why I stared at it for so long. Maybe because I felt like that droplet, hanging on to something that had already slipped away. My phone buzzed. It trembled there, stubborn and unfallen, until gravity finally convinced it to let go and disappear. I don't know why I stared at it for so long. Maybe because I felt like that droplet, hanging on to something that had already slipped away. My phone buzzed. I nearly fumbled it. My heart jumped into my throat before I even saw the screen. But when I checked it, there was no message from Daniel, just a promotional email from the hardware store advertising discounted lawnmowers. I stared at it until the letters blurred, then deleted it with more force than necessary. I sat down, lacing my fingers together to keep them from trembling. The quiet felt like a weight pressing on my ribs. I imagined Daniel pacing the hospital floor, hands on his hips, muttering instructions he didn't fully understand. I imagined Megan in pain, clutching at her sheets, breathing like the nurses told her to. And I imagined Linda at her side, comforting her, whispering things that should have been said by a son's father. A sharp pang ran through me. I could have been there. I should have been there. But I wasn't. A knock at the door startled me. 3 soft taps. I knew exactly who it was before I opened it. Mrs. Callahan stood on the porch holding a casserole dish wrapped in foil and fake confidence. "I had too much leftover chicken," she said, which I knew was a lie. She lived alone and cooked for one. Her way of softening my loneliness was to pretend she wasn't tending to it. "You didn't have to," I said. She pushed the dish into my hands. "Eat while it's warm, and stop pacing holes into your floor." I huffed a weak laugh. Was I that obvious? Only to someone who's lived long enough to recognize that particular brand of heartache. I didn't answer. The words sat heavy in the air. We moved into the kitchen, and she took the chair across from mine as if she'd been invited. She looked around the room, the cluttered stack of mail, the empty coffee mug, the phone sitting like a serpent in the center of the table. "No news yet?" she asked. I shook my head. "And he really said you shouldn't come?" I nodded. She clicked her tongue, irritated on my behalf. "I swear, young people forget the hands that raised them. They forget old hearts bruised too." She paused, studying my face. "But you're still glued to that phone, so you haven't given up hope." I tried to smile, but my expression betrayed me. Hope is a stubborn thing. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Tell me what really happened between you two." I stiffened, instinctively retreating behind old defenses. "There's nothing to tell." She raised an eyebrow. "There's always something to tell." I sighed. "After my wife passed, I shut down. I didn't know how to be both father and widower. Daniel needed me, and I wasn't there. Years passed. I tried to mend things. He tried too. But it's like patching a cracked vase with tape. It holds, but it doesn't look the same." "Has he ever told you how he feels about it, directly?" "No," I said quietly. "He doesn't have to." She scoffed softly. "Men, you'd rather drown than say you're hurting." I chuckled without humor. "You're not wrong." The kitchen clock ticked loudly. each second reminding me how long it had been since Linda called. Hours, too many. The longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became. My imagination kept wandering into dark corners I didn't want to revisit. What if something went wrong? I murmured. What if... Mrs. Callahan cut me off with a firm shake of her head. Don't borrow trouble. You'll have enough real trouble in life without inventing it. I tried nodding, but my fingers kept tapping the table, out of rhythm, restless. She watched me for a moment before softening. George, go to the hospital. I exhaled through my nose. I can't. He made it clear. So what? You're the grandfather. They can't eject you from the waiting room. I won't be the reason Megan feels stressed in labor, I said. That girl deserves peace. Mrs. Callahan smiled gently. And what do you deserve? I swallowed hard, unable to answer. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. Her fingers were cool but steady. Your son's fear isn't your responsibility, and neither is whatever story he's told himself about who you are. There's a difference between respecting boundaries and accepting exile. I stared at her hand for a moment. I'm trying to be the bigger person. She squeezed my fingers. Being the bigger person doesn't mean being invisible. The words settled in me like warm stones, heavy but grounding. But even with her encouragement, something inside me wouldn't move. It wasn't pride, it wasn't stubbornness. It was something more fragile, fear. Fear that if I showed up uninvited, I'd confirm whatever story Daniel had built about me. Fear that he'd turn his back on me in front of nurses, doctors, strangers. Fear that the last link tethering us together would snap. And yet, a part of me also feared the opposite, that something might be happening at that hospital, something serious, and I was sitting here alone, pretending distance equaled respect. Mrs. Callahan eventually left, sensing my heart was no longer ready to listen to advice. She gave me a small nod as she walked out the door, a nod that said, "You're not alone, not really." When the house fell quiet again, the silence seemed to expand, filling cracks in the walls, settling into corners. I stared at the casserole she'd brought, the foil reflecting my face in a distorted shimmer. I didn't have the appetite to eat it. I barely had the appetite to breathe. The minutes crawled. I kept looking at the clock, then the phone, then back at the clock. A ritual of dread. Sunlight crawled across the floor, warming nothing. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the sky began to lean toward a darker hue, that something inside me shifted. A tremor of instinct, a sense that the day was turning toward something I couldn't yet name. I stood at the window, watching the breeze stir the leaves of the old oak tree in my yard. The rustling branches sounded like whispers. A memory rose abruptly. Daniel, 7 years old, holding my hand tightly as we waited for news about his mother's first miscarriage. The hospital air had felt just as heavy then, the same flavor of dread. He'd asked me if everything would be okay, and I'd told him yes, not because I knew, but because fathers make promises even when they're built on hope alone. As I stared out at the swaying branches, I felt my breath catch. The last time my life felt like this uneasy, suspended dread, something had gone terribly wrong. I whispered into the empty house, "Please, let them be all right." But the whisper hadn't even faded before my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, a landline, a hospital landline. I felt the blood drain from my face. Everything stilled. I answered on the second ring, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello? Is this Mr. Harper?" the voice on the other end asked. A woman's voice, calm, professional, but something about the tone, thin at the edges, like paper beginning to tear, told me everything was not fine. I swallowed. My throat had gone dry. "Yes, this is him." "This is Nurse Collins from St. Mary's Hospital. We've been trying to reach you." A shiver slid down my spine, slow and deliberate, as if cold fingers were crawling up my back. trying to reach me. My eyes darted to my phone screen. No missed calls, no voicemails, no texts, except one from my son. Don't come to the hospital. I gripped the edge of the counter. What's wrong? Is Daniel okay? Is Megan all right? She hesitated. That hesitation aged me another 10 years. No one is in immediate danger, she said carefully. But we need you here. It's important. Important? The word escaped me like a croak. Daniel told me not to come. Another pause. Then her voice softened in a way that made my chest tighten. Sir, I can't speak to family dynamics, but your presence is necessary. Legally. Legally. My breath snapped short. Legally meant something had gone sideways. Legally meant paperwork. Legally meant signatures. Legally meant responsibility. Responsibility that didn't belong to a man the family had tried to shut out. What happened? I demanded, sharper than intended. She exhaled, steadying herself. Mr. Harper, I'd rather explain when you arrive, but please come as soon as you can. You are listed as a primary contact for several decisions. My heart lurched. Primary? That can't be right. Sir, she said, more gently now, this wasn't an error. Your son filled out the forms himself. The room tilted. I braced a hand on the counter to keep from sliding to the floor. Daniel had listed me, not Megan's mother, not his friends, not even Megan. Me, a father he'd pushed away for years, a father he couldn't even send a polite text to that morning. And yet, in secret, in private, he'd written my name on documents that mattered. Why? Before I could speak, the nurse continued. Please get here safely. I'll alert the front desk you're on your way. The call ended. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the world spinning around me. For a moment, I felt like a man floating between two opposing truths, the one where my son wanted nothing to do with me, and the one where he trusted me with something he couldn't trust anyone else to handle. I didn't have the luxury of choosing which truth to believe. I grabbed my coat and keys with shaking hands. As I stepped onto the porch, Mrs. Callahan was watering her roses. She glanced up and gasped at the sight of me. George, what is it? Your face. I have to go, I said, already walking to my car. Something happened. They need me. Her eyes widened. At the hospital? Yes. I'll drive you, she said immediately, setting down the watering can. No, I said, waving her off. I'll be fine. You're shaking, she said with that relentless maternal firmness only older women seem to master. You're in no condition. I'll be fine, I repeated, voice cracking like brittle wood. Thank you, really. She hesitated, lips pressed into a thin line that told me she didn't believe a word of it. But she didn't stop me again. Instead, she whispered, Good luck, George. Whatever it is, I hope it— Thank you. Really. She hesitated, lips pressed into a thin line that told me she didn't believe a word of it. But she didn't stop me again. Instead, she whispered, Good luck, George. Whatever it is, I hope it brings you closer. I nodded, though a part of me feared the opposite. The drive to the hospital felt unreal, like I wasn't the one behind the wheel. The streets blurred past, colors smeared by the trembling haze of my vision. My mind replayed the nurse's words over and over. Your presence is necessary, legally. Your son filled out the forms himself. The closer I got to St. Mary's, the harder my heart thudded in my chest. Was Megan in trouble? Was there a complication? Was Daniel panicking? Had something happened to the baby? The possibilities crawled through me like thorns. I tried to shove the worst thoughts aside, but fear is a stubborn vine. It grows anywhere there is space. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, half full, half quiet, usually the sign of a day where the world isn't sure if it should worry or hope. And then I saw it. Daniel's car. The same one he used to beg me to help him fix when he was 16. The same one he dented the night he drove too fast after arguing with me. The same one he drove to his wedding, windows down, music blazing. Seeing it there, parked crooked, abandoned in a rush, made my chest ache. I stepped out of my car slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter the thin line of fate still connecting us. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed something strange. Every step felt heavier than the one before it. Not from age, not from effort, from dread. A kind of dread that didn't simply warn, it whispered. Because under all my fear, one question pulsed. Why would my son tell me not to come if he'd already chosen me to make decisions when things went wrong? What was he hiding? And why would a nurse look at paperwork and say, "Sir, we need you legally"? Those questions followed me through the automatic doors, through the chilled hospital air, through the fluorescent glare that always made people look half alive. I reached the front desk just as the nurse from the phone rounded the corner. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "thank God. Follow me." I looked down the long hallway she gestured toward. Its pale lights flickered, and at the far end, I saw my son, standing rigid, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes flashing with something between anger and panic. When he saw me, his face tightened even further. He marched toward me fast, his steps echoing off the tile floor. "Dad," he snapped under his breath, "why did you come? I told you not to." The humiliation hit me like a blow. But before I could answer, before I could defend myself, the nurse stepped between us, holding a folder. "Mr. Harper is here," she said firmly, "as required. He needs to sign the forms you filled out." Daniel froze, his face drained of color. Megan's mother, sitting nearby, gasped softly. The nurse extended the folder toward me. I reached for it with trembling hands. And right then, right in that cold hallway filled with tension, my son whispered, barely audible, "Dad, please don't open that." For a moment, I didn't recognize my own son. Daniel stood there, shoulders tight as bowstrings, eyes darting between me, the nurse, and the folder she held out like it was an explosive about to detonate. His face wasn't angry anymore. No, this was something else, something brittle, something cornered. "Dad," he repeated, voice thin as paper, "please don't open that." The nurse's brows pressed together. "Mr. Harper," she said, addressing me but looking at Daniel, "your father has every right to review the documents. You listed him yourself." "I know what I did," Daniel snapped. His voice cracked on the last word. He ran a hand through his hair, gripping his scalp like he was trying to hold himself together. I just need a minute." A minute? I'd been given a lifetime of minutes waiting for this moment, and here he was, begging for one more, to stop me from seeing whatever truth lay inside that folder. My hand trembled as I held the edge of it. Thick paper, the weight of decisions, the weight of secrets. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you want to tell me why I shouldn't look?" He blinked quickly, too quickly, avoiding tears or rage or both. His voice came out like a whisper dragged through gravel. "Because I wasn't supposed to need you." The words landed like a blow to the ribs. Megan's mother, Linda, stood from her chair, her face tight with confusion. "Daniel, what is she talking about? What forms?" Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the folder like it was a mirror showing him everything he'd tried to hide. The nurse cleared her throat. "Sir, I can step away if you'd like a moment, but legally, your father must acknowledge the documents before we proceed with Mrs. Harper's care." Mrs. Harper? Hearing Megan called that made the moment even heavier. My son was a husband now, a father, and he had signed something serious, without telling anyone. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "Is Megan all right?" Daniel flinched. Linda stepped closer. "Is she in danger?" "No," the nurse assured quickly. "She's stable, the baby is stable. There were complications during labor, but nothing life-threatening at this moment." Then she added, gently, "But decisions need to be made, and Mr. Harper is listed as legal secondary guardian." I felt the air shift around us. People in the hallway slowed. A doctor passing by glanced over before moving on. Everything swam in a strange, muted suspension. Linda gasped. "Guardian? What guardian? I'm her mother. Why wouldn't? It's complicated, Daniel snapped. Complicated, she spit out. You put him down before me? Before Megan's sister? Before anyone who actually knows your wife? Stop, Daniel said sharply. But it wasn't anger this time. It was fear. Pure fear. The hallway brightened and dimmed under the flickering lights. A baby cried in a distant room. A cart squeaked down the corridor. The world kept moving, while our little corner of it froze. I looked down at the folder. It was thick, yes, but not enough pages to include every reason my son might have had. Daniel, I said gently, I'm going to open it. His chest heaved once, like a man bracing for impact. Before I could lift the cover, the nurse stepped aside to allow a doctor past us. The doctor touched Daniel's shoulder briefly, professional but reassuring. She's sedated now. You'll be able to see her soon. Sedated? My heart jumped. What happened? I demanded. The doctor hesitated, gauging the dynamic. Your daughter-in-law experienced a prolonged labor. Her blood pressure spiked. We administered medication to stabilize her. Daniel nodded stiffly but kept his gaze on the floor. The doctor continued, We need a guardian present for the final consent and possible addendums. Your son designated you in writing. My fingers tightened around the folder. Why me? Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, I didn't want you to come because I didn't want you to see me like this. Like what? I asked. Terrified, he said. The word cracked in the middle. Like a kid, needing you. My breath caught. I'd waited years to hear anything real from him, but hearing that, here, in a hallway thick with tension, felt like being handed a truth I wasn't prepared for. Daniel, I said quietly, I'm your father. You're allowed to need me. He shook his head violently. No, you weren't. He stopped himself, biting his lip, inhaling sharply. You weren't there when Mom died. You weren't there for years after. And I promised myself I'd never rely on you again. The words were a knife, but not unfair, not untrue. They cut deeply, but they cut through a wound I carried long before today. So I didn't tell you about the forms, he continued, because signing them, it felt like admitting I still trusted you, that part of me still hoped you'd show up when I needed you most. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed by his own emotion. I didn't want you to know that, he whispered. I didn't want to let you in just to lose you again. The hallway blurred around me, not from movement, from tears. I didn't let them fall, not yet. Instead, I placed a hand gently on his shoulder, the same shoulder I used to steady when he wobbled on a bicycle, when he walked into kindergarten, when he climbed the steps of a stage to receive his first award. He didn't pull away, not this time. I'm here now, I said quietly, and I'm not leaving. He shut his eyes, exhaling shakily, relief mixed with tears he didn't want anyone to see. Linda stepped back, stunned into silence. The nurse waited with solemn patience. The doctor watched with a knowing expression. And I opened the folder. Inside, on the very first page, was a line printed in official type. Secondary guardian and medical decision-maker name, George Harper, relationship, father. Followed by a section written in handwriting I recognized from science fair posters and birthday cards decades ago. If something happens to me or Megan, my father is the one person I trust to protect the baby. Daniel Harper. I stared at the words, stunned. He trusted me. He trusted me even when he couldn't face me, even when he told me not to come. The nurse touched my arm lightly. Mr. Harper, we need your signature. I looked at Daniel. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he looked back at me the way he used to when he was small. Like he believed I knew what to do. Like he believed I was the person to hold the world steady. I picked up the pen. My hand no longer shook. I signed. As I handed the folder back, the nurse nodded. Thank you. Megan is asking for you. I froze. Daniel's eyes widened. Linda gasped again softly. The nurse smiled faintly. Yes, she said. She woke for a moment and asked for you by name. A warmth spread across my chest, fragile but real. She wants to see you, the nurse repeated. And that was when Daniel went pale, completely, utterly pale. He turned to me and whispered, "Dad, what did she tell you?" For a long moment, Daniel just stared at me, as if I already knew something he desperately hoped I didn't. His jaw worked wordlessly, opening, closing, like he was chewing on the beginning of a confession he couldn't bear to swallow or speak. "What do you mean?" I asked slowly. "She hasn't told me anything. I haven't seen her yet." Daniel's shoulders slumped, relief and fear warring across his face. Whatever he thought Megan had said, he wasn't ready for it to be heard. Not by me, not by anyone. Before I could ask more, the nurse touched my elbow gently. "Mr. Harper, she's awake again. Not for long, but she's asking for you specifically." Me? Not her mother, not Daniel. Me? I couldn't make sense of it. I'd always assumed Megan saw me as an extension of her husband's strange childhood. Polite, distant, occasionally stiff. She never treated me poorly, but she certainly didn't treat me warmly. I was the father-in-law who came to holidays with homemade gifts and awkward stories. The man she wasn't quite sure how to speak with. So why ask for me in the middle of medical uncertainty? The nurse gestured down the hall. "Come, before she sleeps again." I followed her, my footsteps slow but oddly certain. Daniel trailed behind us like a shadow, silent, pale, vibrating with tension he couldn't hide. As we approached the room, I saw Linda sitting outside it, her hands clasped so tightly they'd turned pale. She sprang up when she saw me. "Why does she want him?" she demanded, directing her question toward the nurse. "He hasn't been involved. I'm her mother. She didn't ask for me." The nurse maintained her professional calm. "Megan asked for him by name, twice." Linda looked at me then, really looked. For the first time, I felt her resentment simmer openly. To her, I was the man Daniel rarely spoke of, the father kept at a polite distance, a stranger her daughter married into, not a pillar of the family. I didn't fault her. Many people have judged me for less. But her eyes sharpened now with something close to accusation. "Why would she ask for you?" I shook my head. I truly don't know. And I didn't. At least, not yet. The nurse opened the door. The room was dim, warm. Monitors hummed softly. The steady rhythm of Megan's heartbeat beeped in gentle intervals. The baby, my granddaughter, lay swaddled in a bassinet beside Megan's bed. Tiny chest rising and falling like a small bird breathing under a blanket of leaves. Megan turned her head when she heard the door. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with red. Her hair clung damply to her forehead. She looked exhausted, fragile, and yet, somehow, radiant with the kind of bravery only new mothers seem to possess. When she saw me, her face softened. "George," she whispered. My name in her voice felt unreal, like hearing something precious that was never meant for me. I stepped inside slowly, fearful of disturbing what felt sacred. Behind me, Daniel hovered in the doorway, uncertain whether to enter or run. Megan motioned weakly for me to come closer. I approached her bedside. "I'm here," I said softly. "How are you feeling?" She blinked slowly, gathering strength. "Like I got run over by a bus," she managed with a tired laugh. "But I'm okay. She's okay." My gaze drifted to the bassinet. The baby's tiny hands were balled into delicate fists. She had Daniel's nose, Megan's lips, a face too new for the world, too perfect to belong to anyone yet. My throat tightened. Megan reached out for my hand. Her grip was weak, but the gesture itself shook something loose inside me. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Your mother, she's outside, if you want." "No," she said quickly, surprising me. "I mean, she'll come in later. I needed to see you first." Needed, not wanted, needed. My heart thudded once, heavy and confused. "Why me, Megan?" She looked past me, toward where Daniel lingered by the door. "Because," she said, her voice thin but steady, "there are things your son hasn't told you." Daniel stiffened. I turned to him. "Daniel?" He looked cornered again. "Megan, don't, please, not now." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, meeting his gaze with a softness that carried both love and disappointment. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," she murmured. "I'm doing it because your father deserves to know the truth." "Truth?" I echoed. My voice felt foreign in my own throat. Megan looked back at me. "George," she whispered, "Daniel didn't tell you not to come because he wanted to punish you. And it's not because he hates you. It's because he was terrified you'd see what he's been dealing with." My breath stilled. "What is he dealing with?" I asked quietly. She squeezed my hand again. "Your son has been struggling for months, with fear, with money, with anxiety so bad he sometimes can't breathe. He told me he couldn't have you see him like that. He's ashamed, George, deeply ashamed." I turned slowly toward Daniel. He looked like a man caught between fight and collapse. "Megan," he whispered, "why would you?" "Because I nearly died today," she said simply. "And I'm done pretending things are fine when they aren't." Her words sliced through the sterile air. "Nearly died." I felt my knees weaken. "The complications," she continued, "they weren't minor. My blood pressure dropped so suddenly they had to call an emergency team. Daniel panicked completely. He couldn't think straight. He froze." Tears pooled in Daniel's eyes. Megan whispered, "He was so afraid of losing me that he forgot how to ask for help, even from you, especially from you." The room held its breath. I stepped closer to Daniel. "Son," I said softly, "is that true?" His chest heaved. He looked at me with eyes full of shame and desperation. "I didn't want you to see me weak," he whispered. "Not again. Not like when Mom died. I didn't want to disappoint you." My heart cracked open. "Daniel," I murmured, "you never disappointed me." He shook his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I disappointed myself." The nurse slipped quietly from the room, closing the door behind her. She knew this wasn't a moment for witnesses. Only us, only truth. I turned back to Megan. "And the guardianship forms?" I asked. "Why list me? Why hide it?" She smiled sadly. "Because he trusts you more than he'll ever admit. Because he knows you're steady when the world isn't." I looked back at Daniel. He nodded, tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so damn sorry. I just didn't know how to ask you to be here, not after everything." I reached for my son, my grown man of a son, and placed my hand on the back of his neck, pulling his forehead gently toward mine. He didn't resist. He broke, quietly, rawly, in the way men cry when they've forgotten how and suddenly remember all at once. "I'm here," I whispered. "I was always here. I'll always be here." When he finally pulled back, wiping his face with trembling hands, Megan smiled softly at both of us. Then she said something that Daniel's eyes widened, and my stomach dropped straight to the floor. "And now that you both understand each other, George, there's something else I need to tell you." She paused, gathering breath. "Something Daniel has been hiding from everyone." When Megan said those words, "Something Daniel has been hiding from everyone," the room seemed to tilt. Not physically, but in that subtle way where gravity itself changes allegiance. The fluorescent light flickered once overhead, as if even the electricity braced for what was coming. Daniel straightened abruptly, his breath catching. "Megan," he warned softly, "don't. Not now." She looked at him, her expression tender but unyielding. "If not now, then when? I almost didn't make it, Daniel." Her voice dropped, faint but sharp enough to pierce the stillness. "Life doesn't give us endless chances to tell the truth." He closed his eyes, like a man stepping onto thin ice. I stayed quiet, not because I wasn't desperate to know, but because I sensed that whatever was coming required stillness, not pressure. A father learns that, if he lives long enough. Sometimes silence is not avoidance, it's permission. Megan's gaze flicked to me. George, before the birth, things were hard. Harder than we let on. And not because we didn't want to tell you, but because Daniel thought he could fix everything alone. My heart clenched. Fix what? Daniel shifted on his feet, pacing once, then stopping, gripping the metal railing on the bed. His knuckles went white. Megan whispered, "Daniel hasn't been sleeping. He hasn't been eating. He's been having panic attacks almost daily since the second trimester." Daniel flinched at the words, like each one struck flesh. "He didn't want to worry you," she continued softly. "He didn't want to be a burden." That word hit me harder than the others. Burden. How many times had he believed that? And how many times had I accidentally made him feel it? Regret washed through me like cold water. "Megan," I said gently, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." She nodded. "I know. But that's not all." Daniel swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Sweat gathered along his hairline. "What else?" I asked quietly. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, the kind that demands attention from its fragility alone. "Daniel lost his job 3 months ago." My breath froze in my chest. Daniel's shoulders sank. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the foot of the bed, as if holding himself up was a task he wasn't sure he could accomplish. "Lost his job 3 months ago." I turned to him. "Daniel, why didn't you tell me?" He let out a bitter laugh, short, dry, wounded. "Oh, I don't know, Dad. Maybe because I didn't want you to think I was a failure? Or maybe because every time you called, I felt like I had nothing worth saying? Or maybe because I couldn't stand the thought of you helping me again, not after everything." I stepped closer. "You're my son. Helping you is not a reminder," he cut in sharply, then softer, raw. "A reminder that I couldn't stand on my own." The words sliced deep, not because they were aimed at me, but because they revealed the weight he'd been carrying alone for months. He continued, voice trembling. "I thought I'd find another job before the baby came. I thought I'd fix it, be strong, be the man Mom believed I'd grow into. But applications kept getting ignored, interviews went badly, bills kept piling up, and every night Megan got sicker, and his voice cracked, "and I felt like I was drowning." I reached for him, but he took a step back, ashamed. Megan reached out weakly, placing her hand on his arm. "Daniel, you don't have to pretend anymore." Her touch steadied him, barely. He looked at me, eyes glossy and defeated. "I didn't want you to see how badly I was failing." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him he wasn't failing. I wanted to tell him he was stronger than he believed. But grief, his and mine, created roots that tangled around both our tongues. Megan inhaled shakily. "That's why he listed you as the secondary guardian, because he was terrified something would happen to me or the baby before he could get his life under control." Daniel nodded, shame dripping from every exhausted movement. "I did it the night I found out Megan passed out in the kitchen. I thought if something happened to her and I was a mess, someone had to be able to make decisions, someone I trusted." He looked up at me then, really looked. "And despite everything, that was you." I felt something inside my chest break and rearrange itself in the same moment. But Megan wasn't finished. "And then," she whispered, turning her gaze back to me, "things got worse." Daniel stiffened again. "Megan, please." She shook her head. "You can't keep hiding it, not anymore." He stared at her, face tight with silent desperation. "Not him, not now." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "George, your son has been having panic attacks so severe he's ended up in the ER twice. He didn't tell you. He didn't tell me until after the second time. He didn't want to seem weak." Daniel's voice cracked violently. "Megan, stop!" But she pressed on, her voice breaking. "I stood outside the bathroom door last week while he hyperventilated until he nearly passed out. And he still refused to call you. He thinks he's supposed to be the strong one. He thinks admitting he needs you would make him less of a man." Daniel covered his face with both hands. For a moment, none of us moved. The sounds from the machines filled the silence, small, steady, clinical. Life pulsing in electronic form. Finally, Megan whispered, "I needed you here because Daniel needs you more than he knows how to say." I stepped closer to my son. He didn't look up. I put a hand on his back, the same place I used to place it when he was a child, crying over scraped knees or broken friendships or nightmares he couldn't shake. He trembled under my touch. "Daniel," I said softly, "look at me." Slowly, painfully, he lowered his hands. His face was wet, his eyes red, his breath uneven. In that moment, I didn't see a grown man. I saw my boy, lost, afraid, trying so desperately not to fall apart. "You're not failing," I whispered. "You never were. You're human, that's all. And humans need help sometimes." He shook his head weakly. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "I wish," I said quietly, "you'd let me see you sooner." He swallowed hard. Then, with a shuddering exhale, he whispered, "Dad, I'm scared." I pulled him to me without hesitation, his forehead pressed to my shoulder, his fists gripping my shirt like a drowning man clutching a rope. He sobbed, quiet, muffled, heartbreaking. And I held him like I should have held him all those years ago when grief stole me from him. Held him like a father who has been given one more chance he doesn't intend to waste. When he finally let go, breath shaking, Megan looked at both of us with profound, fragile relief. But then, a soft knock tapped on the door. The nurse peeked in. "Mr. Harper," she said, eyes warm, "sorry to interrupt, but Megan asked earlier if you could do something for her." I turned toward her. "Anything." The nurse nodded toward the bassinet. "She wants you to be the first to hold your granddaughter." Daniel's head snapped up. My breath vanished. And Megan smiled through her exhaustion. "Go on," she whispered. "Meet her." My legs felt unsteady as I walked toward the bassinet. The baby squirmed gently beneath the soft blanket, lips pursing, cheeks flushed. I reached down with trembling hands, and just as I touched her tiny fingers, just as a warmth spread through me that felt like the sun finally rising after years of winter, Daniel said behind me, voice low, shaken, "Dad, before you hold her, I need to tell you something else. The real reason I didn't want you here today." I froze, hands suspended over my granddaughter, breath trapped. Megan closed her eyes, and Daniel whispered, "It's about the money and what I did with it." For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Not the ordinary kind, the quiet that settles when everyone is simply thinking, but a fragile, suspended hush, like the instant before a glass slips from the counter and shatters. My hand hovered inches above my granddaughter, the warmth of her tiny body reaching me before I ever touched her. Slowly, I turned toward my son. Daniel looked hollowed out. Not empty, no, emptiness is simple. This was a man filled with too many truths pressing against the walls of his chest until they bruised him from the inside. Megan watched him with soft worry, her fingers clutching the blanket over her lap. She knew this moment was coming. She feared it, yes, but she also welcomed it. Because this wasn't just a confession. It was a reckoning. "What money?" I asked quietly, though some part of me already knew. Not the details, just the shape of the guilt knotting his shoulders. Daniel wiped his face with the heel of his hand, breath shaking. "Please let me explain before you get angry." "I'm not angry," I said gently. "Just talk to me." He laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "Not yet, but you will be." I walked back to his side. I didn't touch him. Not yet. This was the kind of truth a man needs to deliver with no anchors, even if he's drowning. He swallowed hard. "Dad, I know you helped us buy the house." I nodded. I had. When they were married, I contributed more than they ever knew, quietly covering closing fees, paying contractors they assumed were discounted, slipping money into accounts that mysteriously balanced out when emergency struck. A father's invisible work. But the rest of it, Daniel continued, voice breaking at the edges, the savings you offered, the money you gave us to keep for emergencies. Dad, I wasn't careful. Megan shut her eyes. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Daniel began pacing, hands on his hips, fingers trembling. I tried to invest, thought I was making something better for the baby, thought I was turning it into something you'd be proud of. My heart dropped. Daniel, what kind of investment? He winced, stopping. He couldn't look at me. Crypto futures, he whispered, leveraged. The room spun. Not violently, no. It was more like the ground beneath me shifted half an inch, just enough to unsettle my balance. I had spent years working, saving, being careful. And Daniel, he'd plunged what I gave him into the most volatile market a terrified young man could fall into, all while hiding it, all while pretending life was stable. How much? I asked quietly. He squeezed his eyes shut, chest heaving. Everything you gave us. A dull, heavy ache settled in my stomach. Everything. All the help I had quietly offered to give him a softer life than the one I lived. All the safety nets offered from a distance because I didn't know how to step closer without breaking something. Gone. Daniel, I whispered, why didn't you tell me? He laughed again, this time wet and trembling. Because I thought I'd fix it. I thought it would rebound. I kept thinking just a little longer, just one good trade. But every time I tried to make it better, it got worse. He dragged his hands down his face. And then Megan got pregnant. Megan's eyes opened, sad but resolute. Daniel continued. I was terrified. Terrified we wouldn't have enough. Terrified the medical bills would hit. And when I got fired, he shook his head, voice cracking. Dad, I couldn't breathe. I didn't sleep for days. That's when the panic attacks started. I stepped closer, quietly. Daniel, son, why didn't you come to me? His voice broke open. Because I didn't want you to see what I'd become. A failure. A man who ruined everything you gave him. Emotion clenched my chest like a fist. You're not a failure, I whispered. I lost everything. Money can be replaced, I said. You can't. He stared at me like he'd never considered that truth. Megan took his hand, her thumb brushing his knuckles. Daniel didn't tell you because he thought you already saw him as weak. My breath trembled. Daniel, look at me. He hesitated, then finally lifted his eyes to mine. And what I saw there wasn't failure. It was a child who had tried too hard to be a man all at once. When your mother died, I murmured slowly, I shut down. I abandoned you by accident, not physically, but emotionally. And you learned to hide your pain from me because I hid mine from you. His face crumpled. And now, I continued, stepping closer, you think the only version of you worth showing is the strong one, the successful one, the one who doesn't need help. A tear slipped down his cheek. But son, I whispered, voice cracking, I don't want perfect. I want you, all of you, even the broken parts. He covered his face again, sobbing softly. Megan looked at me, then at him, then back at me again with eyes full of fragile hope. He needs you, George, and so does she. She nodded toward the bassinet. My granddaughter, my blood. A quiet whimper sounded from the bassinet, a tiny, soft cry that pierced through all our heaviness. Megan smiled weakly. She's waking. Daniel wiped his face. Dad, I swear I'll pay you back. I'll fix everything. Just, please, don't hate me. I shook my head. I don't hate you. I never could. A soft clatter sounded in the hallway. Nurses rushing past, a distant monitor beeping. wheels squeaking on tile, life happening beyond our small storm. I walked to the bassinet, my hands trembling again, not with fear this time, but with something sacred. The nurse returned, smiling gently when she saw me hovering there. "Grandpa Harper," she whispered, "go ahead." Slowly, reverently, I slid my hands under my granddaughter's tiny body. She was warm, feather-light, alive in a way that felt miraculous. She blinked up at me with unfocused eyes, her whole world contained in that tiny, curious face. Everything inside me shifted, rearranged, softened. Megan watched, smiling through tears. "She looks like you." Daniel choked on a quiet laugh. "Dad, I'm sorry for everything." Holding that tiny life against my chest, I whispered, "We'll fix it together." He nodded, relief flooding his features for the first time. But just as the tension in the room began to loosen, just as it felt like healing might finally begin, the nurse poked her head in again, breathless. "Mr. Harper," she said urgently, "there's something you need to hear." We all froze. "About the forms," she continued. My heartbeat quickened. "What about them?" I asked. The nurse swallowed. "They designate you for more than just medical decisions." Daniel paled instantly. Megan's eyes widened. The nurse stepped inside fully now, holding a second folder, thicker, heavier, stamped with a bold red stripe. "These," she said softly, "are the additional documents your son signed." She placed them in my hands. "They give you temporary guardianship of the baby." Daniel slumped into the chair as if someone had cut the strings that kept him upright. "Dad," he whispered, voice trembling with fear, shame, vulnerability, "I didn't want you to find out like this." For a long, breathless moment, I could only stare at the folder the nurse had placed in my hands. It felt heavier than paper should ever feel, almost as if whatever lay inside knew the weight it carried. The red stripe across the top was unmistakable. Emergency guardianship documents. Legally binding, irreversible without due process. Temporary guardianship of my granddaughter. I looked up slowly, my mind struggling to keep pace with my pounding heart. Daniel sat slumped in the chair beside Megan's bed, elbows on his knees, hands buried in his hair. His entire body shook, not with anger this time, not even with shame, but with something rawer. Something closer to fear than I had ever seen in him. "Daniel," my voice wavered. "Why?" He didn't answer, or rather, he couldn't. Megan reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "Tell him," she whispered. "You have to." Daniel dragged in a ragged breath, then lowered his hands from his face. His eyes were red, glassy, haunted by weeks, no, months of silent dread. "Dad," his voice cracked on the first syllable. "I didn't think you'd ever see those papers. They were supposed to be a precaution, nothing more." "A precaution for what?" He swallowed hard. "For me." My body went cold. Megan squeezed his hand more firmly. "Daniel, tell him." He let out a hollow laugh, one devoid of humor, full of a bitter kind of surrender. "Do you know what happens to a man who doesn't sleep for days, who panics every time the phone rings, whose body feels like it's betraying him every single morning?" His voice rose, not in anger, but in the desperation of someone reliving a nightmare. "Dad, I was afraid, all the time, afraid something would happen to Megan, afraid something would happen to the baby, afraid I would lose it, lose everything, lose myself." He looked up suddenly, eyes wide with a fear that seemed bottomless. "Do you understand? There were days I couldn't trust myself to drive, days I couldn't leave the house without shaking, days I couldn't breathe long enough to think straight." He pressed the heels of his palms to his forehead. "And the worst part? I hid it. I hid everything. From Megan, from you, from everyone. I kept pretending I was strong enough, man enough, husband enough." His shoulders shook as he exhaled, and I wasn't. A silence fell. Not the quiet of absence, no, the heavy, suffocating kind that fills a room when truth finally shows itself. I sat across from him, the folder still resting in my hands. "Son," I murmured, "tell me why you signed these." He laughed again, that same broken, trembling sound. "Because I didn't trust myself to be okay. I didn't trust the panic wouldn't get worse. I didn't trust that I wouldn't have some kind of breakdown before or after she was born." He looked up, meeting my eyes with devastating vulnerability. "And if something happened to Megan during childbirth and I wasn't stable enough to make decisions, Dad, someone had to protect the baby. Someone steady. Someone who wouldn't freeze." His voice broke. "I couldn't choose my in-laws. I couldn't choose my friends. I couldn't choose myself." His eyes filled again. "So I chose you." The words struck me like a physical blow. Not painful, something else, something deeper, like a wound healing from the inside out. Megan leaned back against her pillows, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He did it out of love, George. Out of fear, yes, but also out of trust." Daniel nodded weakly. "I knew that if the worst happened, you'd know what to do. You'd protect her. You'd protect both of them." I looked down at the baby in my arms, warm, breathing, fragile, so impossibly new that the world hadn't yet had the chance to disappoint her. Then I looked at my son who had carried his fear like a stone lashed to his chest. My son who had stumbled, yes, badly, but still placed his trust in me when he thought he might break. For years, I had believed the distance between us was carved from resentment, but now I saw the truth. It was carved from fear, his fear and mine. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He looked at it as if it were foreign, then lifted his eyes slowly to mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so, so sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," I said, voice breaking. "Fear doesn't make you weak. Hiding it does. But you're not hiding anymore." He let out a long, trembling breath, and for the first time that day, he didn't try to stand tall. He didn't square his shoulders. He didn't pretend. He was just my son. Megan wiped her cheeks. "There's more you need to know, George, about how bad things got." Daniel tensed. "No," I said softly, holding up a hand. "Enough for now. He's shared what matters." Megan looked at me, surprise flickering through her exhaustion. Daniel seemed relieved, collapsing slightly into the chair, as if a burden had been lifted, even if only temporarily. Just then, the doctor entered, tapping lightly on the door. "Is this a good time? We need to go over next steps for Megan's recovery." I nodded. But before he began speaking, Daniel turned to me again. "Dad, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you. Not because of the money, not because of the forms, because I can't do this alone." I put my hand over his. His breath shuddered, his body shaking with held-in emotion. The doctor began explaining Megan's condition, but I hardly heard him, not because the information wasn't important, but because something fundamental had shifted in the small hospital room. A fracture had begun to mend, a wound had begun to close. As the doctor spoke, I glanced down at my granddaughter, a tiny girl who had already forced a broken family to confront truths they'd ignored for far too long. I kissed her forehead gently. "You're the beginning," I whispered to her silently, "not the ending." When the doctor finished and stepped out, Daniel exhaled shakily and reached for Megan's hand. She squeezed his fingers back with tired affection. Outside the door, voices moved through the hallway, distant, urgent, alive. Inside the room, for the first time in years, my son and I were breathing the same air without resentment sitting between us. Megan looked at me as I held her daughter. "George," she said softly, voice thin but sure, "there's one last thing you should know." I turned toward her. She swallowed. "Daniel didn't just choose you for guardianship." My pulse quickened. "He chose you for something else." I frowned gently. "For what?" Daniel closed his eyes. Megan answered. "For custody. If he wasn't fit to be a father." My heart slammed against my ribs, and Daniel whispered, "Dad, please don't hate me." For a moment, everything inside me went still. The room didn't freeze. No, it continued humming around us with the soft machinery of life, the beeping monitor, the quiet shuffle of nurses outside, the muted conversations from down the hall. But I froze. My breath, my pulse, my thoughts. Custody, not temporary guardianship, not medical decisions. Custody. If Daniel wasn't fit to be a father. Those words struck with a quiet force that felt deeper than any shouted accusation could. I looked at my son, really looked at him. He sat hunched forward in the hospital chair, elbows on his knees, hands limp between them. Not the posture of a man defeated by life, or by responsibility, or even by guilt, but the posture of someone who had been carrying too much, for too long, on shoulders never built for such weight. Someone who had always believed he had to do everything alone, because asking for help felt like failure. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Daniel," I whispered, "look at me." He didn't. Not at first. But slowly, like lifting his gaze required a strength he wasn't sure he had, he raised his eyes toward mine. And in them, I saw everything. Fear, shame, love, regret, and something else. Something raw, more fragile. Hope. The kind of hope a drowning man feels when someone finally throws him a rope. "I didn't sign it because I want you to take her," he whispered, voice cracking. "I signed it because I didn't trust myself. Not with how bad things got. Not with the panic, or the job loss, or the money. I didn't want Megan thinking she'd married a man who couldn't handle life. I didn't want you to see me like this. And I sure as hell didn't want my daughter to ever feel unsafe because of me." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I thought, if I fell apart, you'd take care of her. You'd keep her safe. You'd give her the stability I couldn't." His voice fractured completely. "Because I'm afraid, Dad. I'm so afraid I won't be good enough." Megan reached for him, guiding his trembling hand into hers. "Daniel," she said gently, "good fathers aren't perfect. They're present." He let out a small, broken sob. I sat beside him, setting the baby gently into the crook of my arm so my other hand could rest on his shoulder. "Son," I murmured, "you're not alone, and you don't have to pretend anymore." He shook his head, tears falling freely now. "But I ruined everything. I ruined the money. I ruined my job. I ruined—" "You did not ruin your family," I interrupted, softly but firmly. "You tried. You tried harder than any man should have to. And fear isn't failure, Daniel. It's human." His shoulders shook. "And signing this," I added, lifting the edge of the custody document with my free hand, "was not you giving up. It was you making sure your child had protection if you couldn't give it. That is not weakness. That is love." He swallowed painfully. "I was supposed to protect her." "You will," I said. "Not alone. Not anymore." His chin trembled. "Dad, can you forgive me? For the text? For hiding everything? For all of it?" I exhaled, deeply, feeling decades of pain soften, not erased, not forgotten, but something else, integrated, understood, absorbed into something larger than either of us. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I forgave you before you ever needed forgiveness." He broke then, racking sobs shaking through years of armor and stubborn masculinity and unspoken grief. I wrapped an arm around him carefully, mindful of the baby, and held him the way I hadn't held him since he was a child. Megan cried softly too, relief mingling with exhaustion. After a long while, Daniel pulled himself together enough to speak again. "I'll get help," he whispered. "A therapist, a support group, whatever it takes." I don't ever want to feel that out of control again. And I don't ever want to put her, he glanced at the baby, through the things I went through. "It takes courage," I said, "to fix what fear taught you to ignore." He nodded shakily. The nurse returned, quiet as a shadow. She paused at the doorway, noticing the three of us. Megan half sitting, exhausted but peaceful. Daniel wiping tears from eyes that finally looked relieved. me holding the baby with one hand and my son with the other. Something softened in her expression. Recognition, maybe? Empathy. "Mr. Harper," she said softly, "we'll need you to sign the receipt for the custody documents. They won't be used unless absolutely necessary, but they need your acknowledgement." I nodded. Of course. I signed them, not as a man seizing control, but as a father promising to be the safety net Daniel never wanted but absolutely deserved. Once the papers were clipped into the chart, the nurse stepped closer to the bassinet. "Would you like me to help you settle her back in?" I gazed down at the tiny girl sleeping peacefully against my chest. "Not yet," I whispered, brushing her cheek with a trembling thumb. "Just a moment more." Megan smiled softly. "She likes you." "She doesn't even know who I am," I murmured. "Babies know," Megan whispered. "They feel safety, and she feels it with you." Daniel wiped his nose with his sleeve. "Dad, I want you around. Not just today, not just for emergencies. I need you. We need you." I looked at him, my son. Fearful, flawed, trying, growing, healing. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Outside, the afternoon sun shifted through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the room. The old life, with all its mistakes and silences, lay behind us. The new life, fragile, unfamiliar, hopeful, cradled itself against my heartbeat, small and warm and infinitely precious. I held my granddaughter close, inhaling the faint scent of her skin, the sweet, soft breath of a life only hours old. This time, I whispered to her, to Daniel, to myself, "I won't let fear keep me away." She stirred, settling deeper into the crook of my arm. Daniel leaned his head against Megan's, both of them watching me hold their future. For the first time in years, for the first time maybe in decades, the Harper family felt whole. Not perfect, not healed, but together. And together was more than enough.